Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for joining me here at I Hate Rock Music. And once again, I hope you check out some of this stuff and go back and look through some of the older videos and discover some new bands. Some of these bands are a little better known than others. I definitely stick to the obscure bands because everybody knows about all the big bands. But a band that kind of straddles between being kind of legendary now and still be kind of obscure is T2. And as I mentioned, I bought their one and only album, It'll All Work Out in Boomland, back about 1973 or 74. Found a used copy, had no idea what it was. And now we live in an era where all their work has been excavated. Their legend has grown over the years. And I even know where their name came from. T2 is actually the name of a World War II oil tanker. So they started out calling themselves Morning, and then turned out there was another band called Morning, so they changed their name to T2. So fairly obscure choice for a very cryptic band in a lot of ways. And they have an interesting pedigree because Pete Dunton is the man who created T2, and he has a history stretching back to 67, 68, and 69. He was in a group in 1967 called Neon Pearl that had him on Pete Dunton on drums with this bass player named Bernard Jinks. And that album wasn't released at the time. And then there was two Please albums recorded in 1967, 68, and also with Bernard Jinks. And neither of those LPs were released in their lifetime either. But now the both Please albums and both Neon and the Neon Pearl album have been released, and they're pretty interesting. Neon Pearl's very low key, very hypnotic. Um, Definitely worth a listen. I'll probably do a video about them. And then the Please records are what you would expect from that 67, 68 era. Don't really hint at what's to come with T2. Then in 1969, Pete Dunton joined Gun, Adrian Gervitz's band. I did a separate video on them and was their drummer. And of course, they had a worldwide hit with Race with the Devil. So he enjoyed some success. And Bernard Jenks, after Neon Pearl and Please, was in a band called Bulldog Breed in 1969. So Gun and Bulldog Breed were around at the same time. Bulldog Breed is definitely a little more like Please, kind of a mixed bag. Some harder rockers mixed with some symphonic pop stuff and the like. So, but let's get into T2. It's Pete Dunton on drums, Bernard Jinks on bass, and then they picked this guitar player named Keith Cross. And Keith Cross had been playing guitar in Bulldog Breed with Bernard Jinks, and he was in this new band T2, so power trio, and he's only 17 years old. Incredible. Kind of reminds me of a Clear Blue Sky and Spontaneous Combustion, where the guitar player and those two power trios were also just 17. But Keith Cross is amazing, um, for him to have that kind of technique when he's only 17 years old. And there's definitely a lot of hype around him when the T2 album came out. So Decca signed them for £10,000, which was a lot of money back then, and put out the album. It'll All Work Out in Boomland. And side two of the record is all one 21-minute suite called Morning. But what an amazing record! And again, unlike anything anyone had heard before, and probably since, a lot of great power trio rock with incredible chord work and just frenetic leads. A lot of times his leads are so frenetic and frantic, they sound like they're out of control. And of course, we all love that. And so 1970 is when T2 came out. They put out that album. They actually played Isle of Wight, and so kind of surprised that no footage has popped up of them playing at Isle of Wight. I'm sure they were probably a big hit because some live material has surfaced, and they were definitely a smoking live band. But it'll all work out in Boomland is truly incredible. It starts right up with some just wonderful, complicated arrangements, incredible guitar work, and of course an excellent rhythm section. And the rhythm section has to be great with this band because they improvise all over the place, and they stop and start, and they get quiet, and they get soft, and a lot of odd time signatures, interesting chord progressions, a lot of uh, incredible lead work, and so they definitely had their work cut out for them. And so, but it's mixed with a lot of interesting things. There's a couple of quieter pieces on there. There's a couple of interesting quiet breaks in some of the hard jamming they do, and then there's some orchestral uh, music on there with a huge chorus and everything. So it's a really strange and interesting, eccentric record. They could have just come out with all guns blazing with the three piece, but they decided to do a lot of interesting prog moves in there and put in these other kind of musical textures. And then Pete Dunton is a really nice vocalist, very melancholy sounding, a little understated. Uh, really balances out the music in an interesting way, having all this power rock and then this melancholy kind of understated singer instead of having a shouter or a screamer or some kind of classic British shouter. So they started recording a second LP and just disbanded in the middle of it. And thankfully, it's been issued since then. It's come out a couple times as a reissue. One version of it's called Fantasy, and now there's a great 3D set out that has all their collected works, and so it's included with that, which includes some demos and everything. But acetate in 1970 of demos um, for the both the first and second album have been issued now, released in 1997, and a third album of demos was released in 2012. And so after the core band of Cross and Jinx um, had left, then Pete Dunton brought in John Weir on bass and Andy Bound on guitar, and the third demos were made by that lineup. And then later on, they had Mike Foster on bass. So there's a lot of lineup changes towards the end there, and they ended up getting back together in the 90s and doing three albums. The first one's called Second Bite, and they reworked some old material and put some new material on that. And it's not of its time, so I'm going to spend less time talking about that album. But it'll all work out in Boomland. It was a very complicated record. Got a lot of really good write-ups. I'm not sure if they ever toured in the U.S., but obviously toured a lot at all the major spots in Europe, including the Isle of Wight Festival. But one reason why it sounds so good is they had four separate engineers on there: Mike Butcher, Robin Black, Roger Quersted, and John Burns, all top engineers. I'm not sure why they needed that many engineers on the record. Maybe the complications with all the orchestra and the chorus and things like that. But it sounds really great. And between those four engineers, they produced some of the top bands of the era: Black Sabbath, Egg, Flash, Nidrolog, Jethro Tull, Supertramp, Bloodwind Pig, Red Dirt, Chicken Shack, Audience, Trees, Trapeze, Genesis, Dog Soldier, and Refugee. And so, needless to say, all those records are produced extremely well. So it'll all work out in Boomland. Really benefits by having just fantastic sound, and then the demos for the Boomland album and after the Boomland, and then the second lineup of the band. Those are all from acetate, so when you listen to the CDs, you can actually hear the crackle from the acetate. So apparently the master tapes were lost at some point, but wow, Keith Cross, just stunning. And we also now have a BBC collection of BBC material, and it shows that they were definitely firing on all pistons and really brought the goods when they played live. And so there's actually a certain amount of even more freneticism in the guitar work, and just these massive chords that Keith Cross was playing comes across even more so on the BBC material. So I'll attach that below as well as all the material I've been talking about here. But as far as power trios go, as far as early 70s heavy rock goes, as far as classic British guitar music, you really can't do much better than T2, and it's really unfortunate that they burn so bright and burn so fast. Considering their first album came out in 1970, it would have been fantastic to have completely produced and released albums in 71, 72, 73, because all that creativity there and all this high level of musicianship and imagination and uniqueness. That's another thing about T2. They definitely don't sound like anybody else. And as I've said many times in this video already, Keith Cross's guitar work is really something to hear. Just beautiful, just manic and crazy, and that's how I like to hear guitar work in these kind of bands. And a lot of times, some of these guitar players sound a little more restrained, especially when you hear somebody like Keith Cross. But wow! So if there really is somebody out there that watches my channel and likes these kind of bands that hasn't heard T2s yet, this is going to be a major revelation, I would assume. So T2, check them out. Links are below. Thanks for watching.